Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mark Slaugh. I'm the CEO and founder of iComply, based out of Denver, Colorado here. Actually about to head out to Ecuador and Brazil tomorrow for some business. So for the last few years, we've been working pretty diligently with folks around the globe as they enter into a new cannabis commerce of international trade. We're seeing a lot of activity around the globe, just in terms of importing and exporting cannabis, with some countries having high expectations of what they're able to do, and others running into issues along the way and new changes coming down from the World Health Organization, as well as the UN around cannabis policy, CBD, hemp, and marijuana and THC. So I have a robust number of panelists from around the globe that I am trying to coordinate as we speak, from various cultures and backgrounds, and of course time zones. Unfortunately, in the invitation, we had Zoe, who's worked previously in Florida, setting up facilities, and is now sort of founding her business in New Zealand. She had a board meeting that conflicted, even though we've been sort of trying to get everybody on the same page for the last 45 days or so for this webinar. I also have Ziv dialing in from Israel, Michael, who is working out of Latin America, Caribbean, and we also have attorney partners of ours that are working on the Senate bill that recently passed in Mexico. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time here. I guess we might have some folks already joining us, so I want to give the speakers just a couple more minutes here to dial in. I think we have over 70 participants sign up for this webinar, so I know everyone's eager for the information. So I have some very generic questions that I'll be asking in terms of format and giving people the opportunity to kind of introduce themselves, their background, and what they're doing. But really, I'm inviting this to be an open forum for the panelists because there's so much to discover from around the globe in various marketplaces. So I think we have Elías. Are you here on the line with us already?
Yeah, I'm here.
Bueno, muchas gracias por no venir aquí en tiempo. And I think we have some of our other panelists just wrapping up other calls and getting in as soon as they can. So I want to say thank you for everybody and their patience on allowing this to come together organically. I know, being Latino myself, this is just normal for things to run a little bit behind schedule. But for everyone else, we do appreciate your patience as everybody kind of gets dialed in and set up here. So Elias, I'll start with you. You want to give us some background as to who you are, what your firm's been doing in Mexico, and kind of the present state of things as it relates to your country.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me. It's very exciting about it. I would like to present the Mexican case, and obviously, if you have any questions, please do it in the final part of this webinar. I have worked as a criminal lawyer for 3 years. I see a little bit of cannabis crimes or related crimes, but then I switched and I went to a firm which is called Pérez, Ferrer, Abogados. We are very worried about the regulations around the world and also in Mexico. Mexico has a precedent. In 1940, the President Lázaro Cárdenas enacted a law which permit to treat cannabis consumers and drug consumers as patients instead of criminals. But then for the international pressure, they needed to shut down those regulations or were abolished. And with the time passed until 2018, where COFEPRIS, which is like the FDA, but here in Mexico, approved some like 305 products to be imported legally, but those were for a short period of time with the President Peña administration. But when the newly President López Obrador was elected, he abolished all that regulations, and because of 2 Supreme Court rulings, one on the medical side and one on the recreational or adult use side, told the Congress of the Union and the Secretary of Health, we need some regulations, clear regulations to access cannabis products. And we have seen this develops. More than 18 initiatives were presented in this time. We have known these regulations for the time that they have passed. We have studied deeper with the help of Mark to understand the international value of this and how to comply with it. I think this is a huge advantage for Mexico. And we're in the verge of legalizing both medical use, industrial use, also the adult use and other things with this law, which is what I'm going to explain further. So I think that's for me to present.
Yeah, I know, and it's been exciting, Elias, because it's I tell everyone when it comes to Latin America, and one of the first conversations you and I have had for over a year now was the mistakes that were made with Colombia and with Brazil, even Peru, just other countries, and how slow it takes for the politics to catch up to the operational reality of kind of what's happening. So I really appreciate that Mexico has, even though it's taken a while, as I tell everyone, whatever time you think it's going to take, add 2 more years in Latin America easily, because it just takes longer for anything to get done. And then the political change with the presidency, and whether or not it's coming from the judicial side to match up to the legislative side, and then meet administrative code, can be a real challenge. And
it's
I think
going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, and so I think you guys have done a really good job in a short amount of time in being able to try to roll out all 3 initiatives. But of course, that doesn't mean that it's over yet, right? Until seeds are in the ground and harvesting is happening. Tell me, what do you think this government wants to see from the political objective of industrial hemp, from adult use and medical? What's their policy objective? Does it look like import export? They have a domestic distribution model that Colombia forgot about. What does the model kind of look like? What do you think the policy objectives are, high level?
Yeah, it's important to explain one regulation at a time. In the first one, the rules of procedure for medical cannabis, you can be allowed to import raw materials or goods. You can be allowed to import medical compounds or molecular compounds and medicines like Epidiolex, which are final, and you only need to introduce it without the expiration date further than a year when it's come. And you can also import medicine and in some cases seed and flower, but only for medical use. And you can only export pharmacological derivatives and medicines when there's done. And in the other part, for the law that permits the hemp exportation and importation and THC products, it's important to note that it will be allowed to non-psychoactive cannabis to be exported and imported. Non-psychoactive cannabis means the one that has 1% of THC or less. But we have this percentage, which is different from the United States perspective and the Canada perspective, because you guys have 0.3%, and the UN today recognized that non-psychoactive cannabis is where 2.2 is allowed. So that leaves us with a lot of products that can be imported of the United States and Canada, because you guys can, and you guys have the market to do it, because whether you have 2% or less, we can receive it, but we cannot export it, because if we recognize the 1%, everything above 2% cannot be exported to Mexico.
Well, and technically the US has the same problem, because at 0.3%, we're not allowed to export it at 0.31. Yeah. Doesn't mean that people aren't sending stuff to Switzerland in the hemp industry. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. There's a lot of non-compliance out there, but it sounds like there's a tremendous opportunity to get business from the US and Mexico going in this trade, especially on hemp, until federal law changes around marijuana. And then certainly Canada can do both, and have been exporting for some time, THC and CBD. So what does the domestic distribution model look like in Mexico? Are you going through pharmacies? Will you be opening dispensaries? Do we have any idea on how we're going to be getting products that we import or grow and extract and manufacture in Mexico to the people of Mexico?
Yeah, the THC products, as I said, will be sold in a dispensary or in any licensed market that you can buy. You cannot buy it from internet. You cannot buy it for packaging like Amazon or other internet wholesale chains. But it's definitely accessible for the cannabis with non-psychoactive cannabis products. You can buy it with it for internet. You can buy it freely, unless the dispensary doesn't have a license. So it will be very tricky because the you will have to enter those products for a specialized custom. So once the passes the custom, you will have to enter to Mexico legally, pay the fees, and then sell it or you sell it towards a dispensary. Right now, we don't have so many detailed regulations about it. We know that the requirements for having a license to export and import are not yet clearly, and it needs further a closer look for the Chamber of Deputies right now to put it clear and people to comply with, to have a very knowledge. Sorry, to have knowledge of what the requirements are. So right now, it's a problem because the country where Mexico could export or could import, it needs to be legal in those countries, those products. So it means that it leaves a very little countries to work with, like Uruguay with 1%, US, Canada, and obviously, if they want to enter and come here, you will need to comply with further regulations. But hemp products cannot be found in dispensaries. THC products cannot be imported or exported, and CBD products will see what the regulations are for these products.
Yeah, I think one of well, the world is sort of getting it together around CBD, especially the EU, like you mentioned, sort of coming to a conclusion about the psychoactive nature of hemp versus marijuana, and some of the definitions that should hopefully ease country to country transactions in the EU. There's still this major problem of every other country sort of catching up. The United States just as guilty, right? Because we're not quite there yet. So there's a lot of complication in just navigating sort of what is compliant product to what countries. And like you said, we don't even know what those import or export rules will look like. We just know the policy and the vision is there.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that it will be allowed, but we don't know the further regulations to comply with and to companies really succeeding in this market once the regulations are set.
Okay. And Ziv, did you join us at all? Are you on the line, my friend?
Yeah, absolutely. I am sorry to be late for like 2 minutes. You're like my wife, actually. She's like, I'm like, it's like 60 seconds I am late. I have to readjust my watch just for that. I'm like, seriously, 25 years never changes. So anyway.
Ziv, actually,
yeah.
Pearl here is like your wife for me, because I'm going to be late if she doesn't keep me on task.
Good for her. Okay, good. Yeah. Good for all of us. So hi everyone. LJ, I have a question, if I may. We haven't met before, and I apologize for not visiting your country, Colombia. Mainly, actually, no one ever invited me to Colombia, so that
Elías
needs to
is
be
actually
changed.
in Mexico.
I have to tell. In Mexico, okay.
Yeah.
So I thought
Mexican.
Mexican. Well, I have been to Mexico, and I want to be there again. Cancun is wonderful.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I have a question. I mean, like, if we're talking, I'm a foreigner. Okay, I'm from Israel. It's like 25 minutes before midnight my time. So everywhere I travel, I still a foreigner. And I have to adjust, my business culture to do local business worldwide, something that we have to do. Now, I have a question. I know it's not going to be a pleasant question. I apologize in advance, but Latin America has a very bad stigma when it relates, to our industry. Although they have wonderful products, they have top quality products, and everything else. I mean, like, literally, the weather is fantastic, the water is excellent, the laboratories are international quality, everything else. But the stigma is the stigma. So when I'm coming there, how challenging is it going to be for someone like me, a foreigner, to do business in those areas?
Yeah, I think it will be a great place to do business because we are opening this national, and everybody can come and enjoy the products or enjoy investing in the industry or setting operations here. But yes, I think that it lives with two big scenarios. One is that the companies can comply with the regulations and the authority doesn't mess it up with a ton of requirements that make it impossible to comply. And that, of course, will be a thing of law enforcement in one hand, and in the other hand, to have companies that know the rules and know how to apply it. But yes, we're top quality in all services related to cannabis, since the seed to sale. So the services we provide as people in the industry, but it's definitely challenging, and we'll see how the Mexican government implements this policy and how the companies will adjust to that policy and sell the correct products with non peligrosity to the people who consume it. But yes, I think it will be challenging.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Elias just said, and give you a little bit different perspective, because there is, believe it or not, the difference between legal and what your attorney is going to say versus compliance. And in our world,
you know what, you know what the biggest problem with our world? Legal lawyers. I mean, like, the world would be a much better place if we don't have lawyers. I have to seriously. By the way, much cheaper place for that. I'm seriously,
evil, though.
yeah.
Yes, Ziv, I appreciate. This is Michael,
Ziv, so
lawyer
all I
on the
want to
phone.
add to what you said is my experience in Puerto Rico. When American investors, it's part of America, but culturally very different than America, right? It's like Miami's the Hollywood of Latin America, and then there's Puerto Rico, which is so similar in a lot of ways, but they're so distinctly not what you would think of when you think of the United States. So culturally, you have this investment ability to bring money over, and we had sort of control and ownership interests have to be mostly Puerto Rican, but there'd be a lot of misalignment when it comes to seeing the same cultural values or the same ways of doing business. So is it a question of how we're going to see foreigners? I think a lot of times you're being seen as people bringing in DFI, direct foreign investment, being seen as folks with money and resources, and there is an appreciation and a value to that. And I think the stigma in terms of marijuana being associated to the word traficante, right, is where that comes from. So when you hear the word marijuana in Latin America, it automatically means cartels, drug traffickers and mules, and death and destruction. Not because of the drug itself, right? Which
no, I said it's a stigma. I mean, like, and you have to fight it. I mean, like, the most challenging part, that based on my 8 years experience doing medical cannabis, as you know, clinically grade, and you, of course, you know it because you have the formulas. So the most challenging part actually for me, that industry, is to do mass education. How do you actually, convey all those messages to common people that it's safe to use, it's not that stigma, people are not just potheads, it's really good for you on the medical level. Even on recreational side, if you're a safe consumer and you know how to control yourself, it's better than alcohol, So, I mean, like, this is a real challenge, and the problem with that challenge is not getting to the mass people, it's getting to the people who actually makes, the rules, the policies. They are the challenging one, because it's all about politics, and it's really, this is what I'm saying. When I come to foreign countries and I'm a foreigner in those countries, this is my challenge. How do you actually tell people that I have all those beautiful things in Israel? We studied, we learned, we invested millions of dollars in research. We have clinical results. We have proof of so many, a medical condition that cannabis can help. But on the other side, this is the stigma still there. And I think that one of the things that all of us in that industry should put a lot of effort in is doing that, changing those minds.
And Ziv, I think it is important to note that when Mexico is legalizing cannabis, it's going to switch the minds of the people, because it will not see cannabis as a prohibited product. Instead, they will have access to it if they are over 18 here in Mexico, or if they have troubles in their conditions, it doesn't matter their age. But I think once they figure out there's some useful ways to use cannabis or hemp or THC or CBD, they will erase this stigma, but it takes time to people to know the plant and to discover the great things that can happen with this plant.
And to this point, Ziv, it's the key for us, and the reason I do the boring, not fun stuff in marijuana, like standards and SOPs and training, right, is to distinguish us from the cartels and the drug dealers and the stigma. We have to be professional to be legitimate. And to do that, we have to prove our legitimacy more than
all the time,
alcohol,
all the
more
time,
than
all
anyone
the
else.
time.
So there's sort of a
Absolutely.
level of compliance that businesses need to be able to proactively prove, at least in our worldview, that will facilitate worldwide legalization. Because through that legitimization, we get acceptance. And so that's where Elías and I are working on training programs for Mexico to help educate people in the rules and regulations, how to comply with what they need to do through getting through the application process with the right warranties representations. And this is a segue for you, Ziv, because I want to talk about standards, GMP, GACP. Give us a little bit. I know you've been in medical cannabis out of Israel for the last 8 years, and you're well connected there on pharmaceutical level grade, clinically trialed products. But talk to us a little bit about standardization and how important it is internationally, with a little bit of what Israel has evolved to become, as well as sort of how that interplays with the rest of Europe, for example, and where your position in all of that.
Okay. Israel embraced a new safety and quality protocols for the growth and the processing about 2.5 years ago. And it took a long time to create those protocols, to understand, the quality that needs to be done when you grow and when you process. They enforced it on the entire market. And during that process, the biggest grower in Israel, who controlled 55% of the market at its peak, was shut down for not meeting those regulations. And so this is how, serious the government is actually looking at it. We all have to remember one thing. We are not selling fun for patients. If we're talking about medical size, we are selling them a solution that they consume internally. They inhale it, they eat it, they drink it, they use whatever delivery system you want, and it has to be safe. First of all, safety is the key here. I mean, like, you go to a dispensary today, any dispensary, and you ask to get something in cannabis to help you with your condition. Who's going to answer on the other side of the counter? How professional is that guy over there? What kind of information you have? Do they know if the product itself was growing in a farm, or or cultivated in a quality manner, that can provide us with the right, let's say, ingredients, or it was grown without the chemicals or without the hormones that we know of? If you want to consume tinctures, how do you know that it was actually extracted correctly? Where is the kitchen? What is the quality of the laboratory and the kitchen that makes the food or the other products, from quality point of view, and then of course safety? How do you know that? I mean, like, if you're not going to control it, and then this is where you get all those moms and pops, the garage built ups on the backyard, and people make their own stuff. You never know what's inside. And most of the people who are making this, not the big companies, they are buying whatever is cheap on the market, the cheap weed, the cheap oils. You never know when it was extracted. As long as they get something inside, nothing is being tested. You don't have a certificate of authentication or whatever to show that there is real cannabinoids inside. And all those protocols, the growing protocols that provide us with a steady plant, quality plant, free of chemicals, free of hormones, which what we're looking for, was grown with the right water and the right everything else, is extremely important if you want to deliver the same product over and over to patients. We all have to remember, cannabis, especially the extracts, is not repetitive product. Since it's not a repetitive product, we have to come as close as possible to provide a repetitive product to our consumers. So the GAP actually keeps the grow in a certain way that we know that the quality will be there for a long time. The GMP says the same for the laboratory, which is extremely important. In Europe, they have the EU GAP and the EU GMP, the same. We are actually in Israel and Europe, we are using similar protocols for that. And I have to tell you that from our experience, actually, even Michael was there, the biggest processor in Israel, Bazelet Pharma, it's really huge. I can tell you that maybe 100 different ambassadors from other countries visited that place to actually look to see how they do it, what is GMP protocols, how they enforce, how they use the protocols, and they are looking to copy our protocols, you know, and to implement those in their own countries. I think that this is really important because we are not just talking about pharma grade products, because this is going to actually be used directly on recreational products as well. I mean, like, it doesn't, because cannabis is cannabis is cannabis. It's exactly the same. You smoke the same joint if you're sick or if you want just to have fun. Depends on your condition. It's not a different cannabis. There is no such thing as medical cannabis. There's only cannabis for medical purposes, for that matter. You know, so I believe that if we start from the medical side, then all the other products in a recreational market will have to use the same protocol, which is best for all of us. It will screen out 85% of the low manufacturers, non-controlled manufacturers, you know, and this is the best place that we can play. And this is, by the way, this is how my companies are looking at the future. Everything that we do, we look at the day that the FDA or the EU will enforce those protocols, and we are ready today. So we don't want to get out of, you know, and you know that because you know my products.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry for the long speech.
And it's why it's taken 2-3 years to get to where we are. And it's no apologies needed. I think when you said 85% of people are not going to make that grade, that's exactly what we saw and what we're seeing in Colombia, right? Even Uruguay, that has an advanced start since 2014, 2015, has only had one company successfully export flower globally.
Yeah,
right? So we're on the cutting edge of sort of these standardizations and practices. And I'm actually almost envious for Elias and the work in Mexico, because they can learn from those mistakes and hopefully get it right the first time. Because you're starting to see not only the discongruency start to solve itself in a place like the EU, where maybe Romania was looking at these standards and quality different than Portugal, different than Israel, or different than France, who wasn't even allowing smokable CBD or things of that nature in their country, to start to come to some level of standardization. So I would ask, Ziv, maybe from your perspective, what has the feedback been on all of these countries? I think we're just starting to see another round of capital go into Colombia, for example. But what's the experience been on the buyer side, right? Which is really Europe and Israel, because of the limited amount of space, the cost of production. What's been the feedback in terms of the quality that's out there?
Well, we need to separate it in two parts. There are the end users, and I have to tell you that the feedback that we get, the end users are more happy when they get end products, because they can, when a patient is using cannabis and they are already used to use a specific genetics and the specific product that they like, if you change it, they will know on the first time they smoke or they use it that it was changed. They will feel it immediately. And now they are more happy than that. And don't forget that once you have the quality in place and you can repopulate that quality time after time after time, this is where we get to the science part, that we can provide better products if we inject more terpenes inside. If we are working on micro dosage, we can perfect the products once we understand that the quality can be there for a long time. This means the changes for the patients are very, very, very minimal, but we can get better quality products. And if we take 3 examples for a minute, this is from the Israeli side. This is what we see from patient point of view. But if we look internationally, then the protocols are the key, let's say, the key player here, okay? They are opening the doors to other countries. The Brazilian government is requiring to get quality product, GMP approved product. They want to see a clinical usage or clinical studies behind the product, that it is actually safe to be used, and people have been using it. We can see that in Thailand in December 2018, they started actually to do tinctures, CBD-based tinctures for patients. Everything is financed, is subsidized by the government. Actually, I got a call today. This is why I remembered the Thailand, because I got the call today from the Thai ambassador in Israel. They have a delegate coming to Israel next week, and I was invited to consult to them.
That's
From
great.
the Israel, yes. So this is why it popped in mind to do that. And we look at that, and we look at Germany, for example, when Germany made a huge change in Europe, where when they started, with the parliament, the upper house, that was in April 2016, and they approved it, I think that was April 2017, something like that. They allowed to do everything, to import, to export, to process. It was a rolling plan, but eventually you can import and export and do everything you want in Germany as long as you follow the protocols, you follow the policy.
Yeah.
And this is where we want other countries to be at. And we saw that happening last year when Denmark, which is the first of 4 Scandinavian countries, actually said we are going to do the same as Germany.
Yeah. I want to get Elias your feedback. I hear Ziv talking a lot about consistency, quality, documentation, formulation, standard operating procedures, right? The world of compliance and adhering to doing the same thing over and over again. And I know there's complications between just environments. If you're producing something in humid tropical Colombia, it may not be dry, desert, arid, Israel, for example. But how do you anticipate that Mexico is going to, because you said earlier one thing that's kind of, I want to see how you reconcile this, but you're saying on one side you don't want overly burdensome regulations and over compliance, but the standards for international importing and export seem to require a pretty high level of compliance, at least.
And it will go higher, right? and it will go higher than it's today.
So how do you see that, Elias, in terms of the careful balance, right, in Mexico, trying to get it, new market, powerful industry? This is Mexico, for everybody else that doesn't know, will be anticipated that the most sort of out there in terms of economy with cannabis after these new bills. So how do we see that balance between sort of these high internal standards versus too much or overburdensome regulation?
I think it's necessary to look at it as a national perspective and then international, because nationally we have a problem here in Mexico, because when the Secretary of Health was about to publish the rules of procedures for medical cannabis, the National Commission of Better Regulatory Practices told them, your regulation is good, but right now you're making very difficult to people to comply with these regulations. And so you're creating a market where only 2 or 3 big companies can comply and leave the rest without any source of or piece of the market. So you need right now to be a little more open to let companies enter this industry, and then we have a problem. If you control this market, people will only buy to you and it will be expensive. So it needs to be clear, and it needs to be companies to be clear about what they can do here in Mexico. And then if you are complying with the law in Mexico, or you think Mexican law it's not the highest standard, you may need to comply with other regulations in order to be successful international, to export into Germany, to export into Uruguay, to export into Colombia. So if you want to enter the market here in Mexico, just follow the Mexican rules. But if you want to comply or have higher expectations to the international market, I think yes, those GMP or other compliance will be needed to success in this industry. But it's very difficult when a country doesn't have legal cannabis and has tons of cannabis in the streets to tell people, this is no good, you need to buy the expensive one. So it's a matter of understanding which company is doing this for the safe of the patient, the safe of the consumer, the safe of the people who want to buy cannabis, instead of saying you comply, you get the license. Because if only one people comply, it's very difficult to know where the competence is, and where people prefer to consume. If they want to buy for another company, if they want to buy for another country, maybe Mexican cannabis is not great after all, and people want to buy it from Colombia or Uruguay, or maybe it's vice versa. Mexico will be the great exporter because it complies with the regulations of the United States, Canada, the European Union.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of see how we implement it and how we comply with it. That's the key in this business.
Elias, I think you brought up a really good point, that there is two different views in the policy. There's the international, and then there's sort of the domestic and national. So what I like about Mexico too is you've got a great indigenous and social equity program, at least on policy. So you want Mexicans to be able to produce a domestic market for Mexico that's very successful, almost first as a building block, and by necessity, if they can do that, sort of reach the level of what international firms might be doing in the import-export model.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part, because we are foreseeing that 40% of the license for cultivation or harvesting cannabis for 5 years will be to the communities that were most damaged by the prohibition.
Which is huge for Mexico.
Yeah,
for Mexico.
That is huge. And we also have one very important opportunity, because we are part of an international treaty, and we are part of some of the best practices to manufacture cannabis. And it could lead to Mexican cannabis be recognized worldwide for its quality, for the people who produce it in the region that they produce it. Some sort of tequila or mezcal. I think that could be a great aspiration for Mexican cultivators to see we are the best in the world. Look at it. We are recognized worldwide for the best quality of the product, but indigenous people or the communities that are damaged by the prohibition, they don't have the resources to comply with these regulations. So the part that we have to keep in mind is that if you want to comply nationally, we'll do it. But then internationally, we'll need to do it in a greater scale and tell the people and the producers here in Mexico, do it the best way it is. Do it the best way that it can be produced, in not only in Mexico, but in the world.
Yeah, it's a great point. And as you guys are talking, I'm thinking ISO, right? International standards that are recognized by 157 countries around the world for just consistent quality and production, in addition to sort of GACP that we talk about and GMP. And just for everyone else out there to kind of know that, that means the world of enterprise resource platforms and having documentation above and beyond sort of what the minimal expectations are, no matter what your country might be. So I did want to acknowledge that we had a question come through here, and we're kind of wrapping up here to the last 5-10 minutes of the presentation. So I want to be aware of everyone's time. Also looks like Michael was finally able to join us a little bit, and Michael, Ziv, and myself, and Elias to some degree through the network of just folks that we have been working mostly in Latin America and South America on the production side, and then Ziv a lot in Europe, just in terms of getting products. But Michael, I did want to acknowledge you here in the last few minutes, just to kind of let people know where you've been and what you've been doing and where the horizon might be for Latin America.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you guys, everybody, for the 2 minutes or 3 minutes that I'm going to say hello. I've been involved in the market. I love hearing about Mexico's new regs and stuff coming out. I've been hitting Mexico for a couple of years. Mark and I have been hitting several countries in Latin America, but I don't know. We haven't discussed anything about the new declaration made by ONO this morning, which is requesting that the countries take it out of the controlled substance. And I haven't read it, but I don't know if anybody has, and they can put 2 cents in, because it's interesting that this morning we now have a future path towards a normalized regulation whereby all countries can work together as opposed to having different regulations on standards and practices. So I joined a Hispanic chamber for international cannabis business, and that's our main goal, is to standardize throughout the world so that this import-export business can flourish, and the countries are in compliance with a standard that is a global standard as opposed to a local standard based on countries. And if anybody's read anything and can share what happened today, I just heard it happen. I haven't read it.
Yeah, I'll acknowledge Deepak's sort of contribution here. Thanks. But essentially, it's a milestone for countries to legislate their own medical cannabis laws and allow for facility between import and export. That's been a huge question since the UN convention from 1967 that we're still operating on here, that impacts these state laws, or these countries' laws. It's why Mexico is only going to be importing, exporting medical, because it has to be for research purposes. There's no real regulation around adult use being imported, exported that way. So these countries have sort of been operating in a UN gray area for some time. And so this is a huge milestone. And I think that's going to be, definitely a big consideration. And Ziv, to your point, there's countries trying to still operate in the gray area. Portugal might try to take product in and turn it into EU GMP compliant product. And we've been trying to figure out exactly how all this should work. Most of the delays in Colombia, the small amounts they're allowed to import, export, same thing with Uruguay, have been a tremendously difficult process between governments around the world to try to get the right forms, right? The right information just on the right pieces of paper to match up across the lines. So I definitely think this is a pretty important conversation to have, and I do want to appreciate everybody for joining us, and I want to give the audience some time to get their questions answered as well, because there's a lot here we're trying to unpack, and believe it or not, the world is a pretty big place, so there's a lot of different things happening in different areas of it. But I did want to touch base at least around some of the major regions, that I think being Latin America, that definitely being Europe. We also had invited South Pacific and Africa as well, South Africa, which is working on their own possibilities for low-cost product. But again, I think everyone's kind of facing these standards challenges and bringing their compliance up to code in order to really facilitate import-export. So I do want to just go and allow people to get their questions answered from our panelists while we have everyone here, and be conscious of the time here for the next 5 to 7 minutes.
Mark, before we start,
Sure.
I'd like to do a little commentary. I think that the most important part of these regulations about the UN convention is that 2% of cannabis, or the percentage of THC, it's greater, and it could lead to countries doing their own laws and complying with other international treaties. Maybe we see 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the country said, it's very difficult to do this process. We may do it again, but with clear rules for everyone. But it's a good start to countries fall like dominoes. Like in the United States, when a state legalized it, the neighbor states plan to do it. So I think it's only a push to other countries to start doing this process.
Absolutely. And we're even encouraging clients here in new markets like Missouri and Michigan, state markets, to get ahead of GMP compliance now, right? If we know that eventually the United States will be allowed to export, wouldn't you rather be at sort of the top tier? And it's much easier to build your facility right the first time than it is to go back and retrofit your facilities. So I would definitely agree with that completely. And it's a huge message for anyone looking to do things internationally. So Ziv, I know you've been answering some of Deepak's questions here, but Deepak, you seem to be pretty active in doing this. So I think you can certainly take yourself off mute and ask some questions if you'd like, to the panelists. I'll give you a minute here for a question and see if we can get a response.
Yeah, I think Ziv's answering my question as we speak. There still seems to be quite a bit of kind of a lack of clarity with respect to the Israel regulatory system, where we do have companies from Canada that do not have GMP, leave alone EU GMP certification, that continue to sell to Israel. So I just wanted to hopefully get some clarity around that process. And just a quick comment as well while I'm at it. I mean, the UN vote today does very little. I think there was a comment being made about global standardization. It actually doesn't do anything for global standardization. It actually now gives countries like the United States an excuse to not look at delaying things on a federal medical cannabis regulatory system, blaming the UN, because that's no longer an overhang any longer.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's saying that it creates a global standard. I think what we're saying is it starts to lead towards facilitating that ability. And then to Elias's point, if you're going to see it more regionally or country to country treaties with who's legal on what. But certainly I think having that update from them is going to move things in the right direction. And to your point, yeah, if we have a president who wants to step away from it completely or make up their own rules or be a bully in the game, hopefully our new president-elect isn't that way, then certainly you've got up a good point there. So I appreciate that contribution.
And Deepak, I owe you an answer regarding the Canadian-Israeli state, especially about Cannabis. Last I heard about Cannabis, they sent only samples to be registered here. I'm not aware of any kind of, massive shipment coming to Israel on products. The only thing that we imported was around 3.5 tons, 3,500 kilos of flowers from Uruguay. That's what I know of. There were another 250 kilograms coming from Portugal, but they were only repacked, as I said, under GMP, and they were not GAP, and therefore it was destroyed. But I can actually check that tomorrow morning. My time is already tomorrow for you, so that means you live in yesterday for me. So I can check that and give you an answer.
And I would just be really conscious and careful with forward-looking statements from Canadian companies who are on the public market, because a lot of them are selling their facilities right now, and they lost their butts on their stocks. So if they're going to say anything that could be prospectively good towards an investment, really even the link you just sent, be conscious about where it's coming from. Always look at financials, because any forward-looking statements like that aren't necessarily reality yet. And I think what you're learning from this whole conversation is the complexity involved. And the limited ability to be able to get products across country lines is the problem of the day.
Oh, now I see. Okay. Deepak, yeah, I see that. Yeah, I know that. Well, this is what traded companies are doing. They sign a contract for future delivery. Nothing is delivered, but you think that it was exported already. I can tell you for sure that Conduct purchased 400 kilograms of Uruguayan flowers directly from Bazelet because they couldn't secure it directly from Uruguay. Actually, Michael and Mark were involved on this. And so maybe, they signed an agreement with them, but if you can see by the PR itself, it said it will be supplied by December 31st next year. So I'm not really sure how this is going to play out eventually, but again, best of my knowledge, it was not supplied yet to Israel.
Yeah, and always just consider the source. Anyone else want to chime in and have any questions for our panelists here as we kind of wrap up our import-export conversation? All right, well, I appreciate everyone for joining us. We will go ahead and send you out a copy of the video today. I appreciate everybody joining in on the conversation. If you have any questions for our panelists, we're also going to be able to provide you with their contact information on that email chain. So Blair, Pearl, and the iComply team will be in touch. If anybody needs anything while I'm in Ecuador, Brazil, or Latin America, please let me know. I think one thing that's important is to understand the importance of compliance here and getting your facilities really up to standard. Like I said, we're in the process of helping people with GMP, GACP, and ISO compliance for their facilities if they're looking to be importing and exporting cannabis around the world. It's exciting new times, and I thank everybody, especially our panelists, for joining us on different time zones around the world. And I hope everyone has a great holiday and has a great rest of their day or evening.
Thank you for having me. Toda rabá, thank you, Mark, y gracias a todos.
Gracias a ti. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Bye, guys.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.